The ultimate goal everyone online is desperately trying to go for is going viral, no matter the cost. Social media and algorithms are constantly pushing us further and further in order to grasp people's attention. So much so that some creators are ready to do anything in order to get it, even if this means to ridicule oneself, bullying others, wasting things, and even hurting yourself. In fact, it seems that the lower you are ready to degrade yourself, the greater the result. Just to go viral. Some people have even lost their lives in the process. So, why is going viral such an interesting pursuit? What does it bring you? I mean, we have seen some of the most absurd content going viral lately, so it truly begs the question. Attention? Validation? Fame? Wealth? I think it's probably a mix of all of it. However, when we look closer to the long term and short term of some of the most viral creations and creators, we can see that the most global pursuit is simply popularity. Popularity has been used as a way of measuring the worth of something or someone for generations. Nothing new under the sun. From early on, we learn that being popular will bring you an access to an easier and more comfortable lifestyle. Look at how teenagers compete for popularity at school, for example. They learn throughout their childhood that being different, acting differently, or thinking differently from others will bring you bullying, loneliness, and hardships in general. Therefore, popularity is the direct byproduct of conformity. But why does this matter so much to us? And most importantly, where does this obsession with popularity lead us? I'll start answering these questions by telling a short personal story. As a teenager, while we were studying about the Second World War and the Nazi occupation of my native Belgium, I remember our history teacher asking the class, "So, what do you think? Would you have complied or not with the Nazi ruling of the time?" To which the entire class shouted, "Of course not!" as if it was an evidence. And our teacher replied, "Well, don't forget that history is always told by the victors. If the Nazis won the war and I would have told you the history of their success and asked you the exact same question, you would have all replied, 'Yes, of course.'" This was a great example to show that the popularity of an idea, an action, or an ideology is more important to the majority than its ethics, its facts, and the morals on which it is based. And this statement is very important to keep in mind for the rest of this video. If I asked you the question, are you a conformist? Most people would answer that they're not. Or at least that's what they will want to believe, as ironically, it is commonly seen as a negative trait in someone, which shows a lack of critical thinking and personality. In fact, we always stigmatize the enemy as being a sheep to a more popular opinion than ours. However, the fact that there is a group of people, small or big, with opposite opinions than ours doesn't mean that we are not conformist ourselves. I remind you that to conform means to behave according to a group's standards. So if you agree 100% with either one set of beliefs or an ideology or even with another person's opinion, then you have conformed with that set of beliefs, ideology, or person's opinion. The truth is that we are all conformist to a certain degree, as otherwise society would simply not function, or at least not as we know it. And it would be absolute chaos. Like all things in life, conformity is a spectrum. We all conform to certain social conventions on what is acceptable to do, to say, and to the rules of society in general. Conformity, in this sense, keeps you part of society, so it is important to the individual to conform to certain things, or to a certain degree. This prevents anarchy and chaos. However, when we talk about conformity here, we obviously mention the level of conformity that is detrimental for someone. The type of conformity that stops someone from being an individual and developing their own way of thinking and their own way of doing things and their own opinion. Basically, the conformism that stops an individual from being their true self. This is a sacrifice we do every day. Authenticity for popularity and our own identity for acceptance. Now, most people prefer to ignore this in themselves, as the deal seems like a good enough one. They have comfort and security. Isn't it more important than authenticity after all? They don't even have to make up their mind about things. They simply have to abide by an opinion that roughly matches their sets of beliefs in general. But what if this was an illusion? What if authenticity was more efficient at protecting you than the security and comfort brought to you through popularity and conformity? Think about it. How many things do you do in your life simply based on the fact that everybody else does it, and not whether or not it is in your own interest to do so, and whether or not it lines up with your personal convictions and your ethics, or even sometimes your health? How many people do you admire simply because they are famous? How many products do you buy simply because they are the most popular ones? Let's start easy. As a musician, one of the easiest examples that comes to mind is the use of Spotify. Spotify delivers objectively a less good quality of music than its competitors. It is a fact. It is also more expensive than most of their competitors. It pays artists less than most of other services, and publicly supports AI music and AI features, helping the deterioration of human-made music, and also directly supports the 3 major labels instead of independent artists and smaller labels. However, it is by far the most popular streaming service, even among musicians. Why? Well, because it is the most popular one. This means that most people accept to have less for more money with less good ethics, simply based on the fact that more people use that application. That's how powerful conformity is. Now, as an artist or musician using Spotify, you are literally directly contributing to the destruction of your own industry with a worse quality of audio, and you are paying more for it, and you're paying every month for it. And this is where the conformity is starting to lose its sense completely. Okay, so the last example is easy to discuss because the consequences are mostly incoherence with one's self-interest and a small economical disadvantage. However, this video would not be complete if I didn't talk about the darker effects of conformity. A more complex example would be obeying the law. We often associate law with morality, when in fact they don't always match. Although in a perfect world and in an ideal society, the law is supposed to reflect what is moral and what isn't. In our world, the law is also used to encourage certain behaviors, whether or not they are seen as moral. The best example of this are the Nuremberg trials. Mostly seen as a satisfying punishment of war criminals after the Second World War, I think that most people have sadly missed the point of it. We often forget that those war criminals were in fact, at least most of them, simply obeying the law of their country at the time of their actions. Although immoral, most of them simply obeyed orders, and in fact, not obeying would have made them criminals under the national laws of the time. And a quick disclaimer here, it pains me to clarify this, but obviously by stating this, I do not excuse or undermine the action of said individuals. End of disclaimer. So at the Nuremberg trials, they essentially got punished for not breaking the law, at least most of them. This is when we see that obeying to authority is sometimes far from being the moral and correct thing to do. But morals always seem to catch up with you, whether it aligns with legality when you act or not. Obeying authority without asking yourself if it suits your moral and ethics is one of the most perform ways of conforming. Mostly because the lack of conformity on this matter is also one of the most dangerous ways on an individual level. The consequences of non-conformity here can be very serious to someone's life. So, of course, by explaining this, I am not calling for anarchy and the non-respect of the law, as I mentioned earlier, society couldn't work without it. However, I believe this is more important than we think to question the fundamental things our society is based on when we feel it isn't fair, and especially when it doesn't line up with our fundamental morals and ethics. Conformity of this kind is by far the most dangerous one for our society. Questioning authority and popular opinions will also help to see differently certain individuals considered like public enemies and allow ourselves to see the more complex pictures behind any conflict and political actions. So, why do we conform? Before I answer this question, please make sure you liked and subscribe, and do not hesitate to leave in the comments your opinion about all of it. The existential psychologist Rollo May, in his book Man's Search for Himself, wrote, "The opposite of courage in our society is not cowardice, it is conformity." With the above examples showing smaller actions and deeper and darker applications of conformity in our society, it sheds light on how toxic conformity can be for an individual, hidden under its disguise of comfort and its promise for security. But are this disguise and this false promise the only reasons why we fall for the trap of conformism? Another effect that independent thinking can have to someone is that it essentially allows us to see the gray areas in everything, which is a very scary thing to do for most people. The more complex the issue, the more people love to abide by already made thoughts about the said issue, which explains the popularity of extremism on many subjects, not just politics. In fact, Schopenhauer saw the conformity as a form of mental laziness and cowardice. It is obviously tiring to make up your own mind about complex issues. You have to stay curious, gather information, and then make up your own thoughts. But it is also scary, as if you end up being wrong, it is your responsibility. You failed. You got it wrong. By adopting someone else's opinion, which seems fair enough to you, you don't just save a precious time and mental energy of finding these conclusions by yourselves. If you end up being wrong, you won't feel so responsible for the consequences, as you didn't come up with this conclusion. You simply adopted it. When in fact, that won't save you from the responsibility of your actions or inactions, as we saw with the Nuremberg trials, which is, I admit, one of the worst examples here. But what we understand is that normalizing something through its popularity doesn't make you immune to its consequences. In today's society, I don't think it has ever been this important to open our eyes to this last phrase, as our society tends to normalize more and more mediocrity, stupidity, and more worryingly, immorality. While being an intellectual is mocked, and most of the icons of our times are openly uneducated, simple-minded, impulsive, and rude, we tend to normalize and even bring to fashion uncultured and low-intellect people. We give more value to emotional reactions than sensible ones, while bringing to fashion senseless content. I mean, we currently live in a world in which a head in a toilet singing Skibbity is making 272 million views, in which the lyrics of the most successful pop songs could be written by a 6-year-old, in which most movies being released today don't offer complex scenarios anymore, just so that it allows the audience to deep scroll empty content at the same time. But also trends such as the 6'7" thing. It literally doesn't mean anything, but people are screaming it everywhere as if it was a private joke, when it is neither private nor a joke. Conformity nowadays seems to lead us to kill time. Not learn, not think, not grow, but simply kill time. We used to value knowledge and culture. Someone knowledgeable or with an intelligence over average was considered superior back in the days, and it was seen as a role model. Now, we have managed to turn this trend around completely. The new generation's role models encourage this degradation of oneself. Conformity has never been as dangerous for our minds than now. Don't get me wrong. Bad habits have really always been some of the habits promoted through conformity, such as smoking, abusing of alcohol and drugs, fast food, and in general, unhealthy activities, which brings immediate comfort and pleasure, but are also considered as being cool, so it can therefore bring popularity to someone. But in today's society, we seem to also promote general ignorance and mental deterioration.
Reading books is a very cheap way to, I guess, entertain. I wouldn't call it entertainment because my brain is far too advanced. I'm too smart to read. I'm not gonna sit there and go, smart people read. No, I need action. I need constant chaos in my life to feel content. I need to be driving a supercar and fighting. A bunch of hoes and champagne and going crazy.
I'm from Liverpool, so I live in a country.
No, Liverpool's a city.
A city?
Yeah.
If you go on a plane and go to another place, that's still United Kingdom, isn't
Depends
it?
where.
Where
do you
so,
want to go?
so Spain.
That's not United Kingdom. Europe.
And with the use of social media, deep scrolling, and empty content, this trend is even more worrying than before. While the addition of AI in our world has never made critical thinking more important in order to navigate through life, we seem to actively promote the lack of it. Now, with this, but also some other immoral behaviors such as intolerance, verbal violence, even mocking the death of someone who doesn't share your views, extremism, the time to question the level of our own conformity has never been as relevant as now. Not to save the world from all these things, but simply to save ourselves. We mentioned at the start of this video that, ironically, no one sees themselves as conformist. In fact, I have made a test among my Instagram followers, and here is the result. This mostly shows, though, that the majority of people think of themselves as free thinkers, and this is the most dangerous part. In today's world, we promote difference and uniqueness while being obsessed with belonging to a community and fitting in. We promote tolerance while condemning anyone who doesn't share our views. We openly prone authenticity while actively sabotaging it on a personal and societal level. This duality leads us to believe that we think for ourselves while adhering to the community's beliefs on subjects we are less or not knowledgeable about. It also prevents us from knowing how conditioned we are in our own set of beliefs, as we are told to vilify anyone thinking differently, and we therefore never truly listen to them, and therefore never truly challenge our opinions. Authenticity is the only way you can manifest your true self and what makes you different from any other persons in this world. In a way, it is what gives meaning to your existence. Get to know who you really are and what you have to offer to this world. How can you do this if you constantly try to fit in and conform to fit someone else's vision and get someone else's approval? To go back to a more artistic view of the subject, I believe that art is the easiest vector to find and express your true self and express your authenticity. This is why it is so powerful. It is also why it is so painful when we have our art criticized, as it is a part of ourselves, bare naked, that gets criticized. But like everything powerful, it is also one of the easiest vectors to succumb to conformity. I will leave you on these questions. Are you still creating art if your goal is to go viral? Can you really create your best art by being more focused on how popular it will be instead of being focused on whether or not it is authentic and genuine? Well, I know I have my own answers to these questions. And on this, thank you very much for making it until the end of this video. Keep creating and stay weird.